The Las Vegas Hilton showroom held 2,000 people on a good night. And in August of 1974, every night was a good night for ticket sales. The room filled early. The tables near the stage were occupied by couples who had driven from California and Arizona and sometimes as far as Kansas, people who had saved for months to sit close enough to feel the heat of the stage lights. The chandeliers had been dimmed to their pre-show setting, casting everything in a warm amber that made the room look more intimate than it was. The cocktail waitresses moved between the tables with practiced efficiency. The sound of ice against glass, of low conversation, of 2,000 people collectively holding something in, anticipation, or maybe hope, or maybe just the particular excitement of being somewhere that felt important. It was a Tuesday, in the dressing room 47 steps from the stage. Elvis Presley sat in front of a mirror he had stopped really seeing. The reflection showed him the things he already knew. The white jumpsuit with the sundial pattern, the heavy turquoise belt, the hair that Joe had styled an hour ago and that looked exactly as it was supposed to look. What the mirror couldn't show him was the throbbing behind his left eye that had started 3 days ago and hadn't fully stopped. It couldn't show him the weight in his joints that wasn't quite pain, but wasn't comfort either. A heaviness that had settled into him somewhere around the third week of the engagement and made each show feel like wading through something thick. He was 39 years old. He had been performing professionally for nearly 20 years. The Las Vegas engagement had been running since August 1st. 2 shows a night, 4 nights a week, with a Monday dark. The math of it was simple and crushing. 16 shows behind him, more in front, each one pulling from the same reserve that wasn't refilling the way it once had. Between shows he slept in fitful stretches. He ate at odd hours. He read the books that arrived in stacks from the metaphysics shops. Books about energy and consciousness and the nature of the soul. And sometimes he found comfort in them, and sometimes he finished a chapter and felt more alone than before. Charlie Hodge appeared in the doorway. He always appeared in the doorway at exactly this moment, as if he carried the countdown inside him. "Full house," Charlie said. "Hot crowd. Nice mix." Elvis nodded. Hot crowd. Nice mix. The vocabulary of 2,000 nights. "Anything special tonight?" Charlie hesitated for just a moment, which meant there was something. Charlie's hesitations were small and precise, barely readable to anyone who didn't know him well. "There's a kid," he said. "Front table. Been sitting there since they opened the doors at 6. His father's with him. They drove from Nebraska." Elvis turned from the mirror. "Nebraska? His name is Danny. He's maybe 14, 15. The father wrote us a letter a few months ago. The kid's been going through some trouble at school. Difficult year. The father said this was..." Charlie paused, choosing his words the way he always did, with care. "He said this was the thing his son asked for. Not for Christmas or his birthday, just asked, could we please go see Elvis?" Elvis looked back at the mirror. He didn't say anything for a long moment. What kind of trouble? The letter didn't say exactly. Just trouble. The way kids have trouble. The orchestra was warming up through the wall. He could hear the bass notes more than the melody. A low pulse that had become so familiar, it felt like his own heartbeat at this point. He stood up slowly, squared his shoulders the way he always did, and let the dressing room fall away behind him. 47 steps. The first thing that hit him when he stepped into the light was the sound. 2,000 people rising to their feet as one body. The applause crashing over him like something physical. It never quite went away. The power of that sound. Even on the nights when everything else felt hollow, the moment of walking into that wall of human noise could reach through the performance and touch something underneath. He raised his hand. The crowd roared louder. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." He found the front tables quickly. He always did. His eyes had developed a kind of practiced sweep that took in the first few rows within the first 30 seconds. Reading the room the way a ship reads water. He saw the regulars, the faces he recognized from multiple nights, the women who came every show and positioned themselves close enough to receive a scarf. He saw the industry people, relaxed and slightly separate from the civilian excitement. He saw the couples on anniversaries, identifiable by their careful clothes and the way they leaned toward each other. And he saw the boy. He was sitting at the front left table, close enough that Elvis could have reached him from the stage lip without kneeling. He was young, younger than Charlie's estimate, maybe 13, with light brown hair that had been combed for the occasion, and a collared shirt that looked like it was new or recently pressed. He sat very straight, the way young people sit when they are trying to appear older and more composed than they feel. His father sat beside him, a broad man in a sport coat, who had the look of someone who had driven many hours and arrived somewhere he was quietly proud to have delivered his son to. But it was the boy's face that stopped something in Elvis's chest. It wasn't excitement. That was the thing. Every other face in the first few rows was lit with the particular electricity of seeing something famous. Something they had only seen on television or in photographs suddenly made real and present. But the boy's face was still, not stunned, not disengaged. Still in the way that certain faces get still when they are finally somewhere they have been trying to get to for a long time. He was watching with the concentrated attention of someone who intended to remember everything. Elvis launched into CC Rider, and the room ignited. The show had its own momentum, its own gravitational pull. Songs gave way to songs. The band was sharp tonight, tighter than they'd been on Sunday. Ronnie Tutt behind the drums was laying down the kind of rhythmic foundation that made everything else easier, and James Burton on guitar was listening and responding the way only someone who had been playing alongside you for years knew how to listen. The backup singers, Kathy, Myrna, Estelle, brought the harmonies up in the places where they were supposed to come up, and the room breathed in and out with the music the way rooms do when everything is working. Between the fourth and fifth numbers, Elvis moved to the edge of the stage, the way he always did during this section, to work the front rows. He crouched down, accepted the hands reaching up toward him, pressed his forehead briefly to the forehead of a woman who had been coming to the Vegas shows for 3 years. He distributed 2 scarves. He said something into the microphone that made the room laugh. He was in front of the boy's table when he stopped, not dramatically, not because anything had happened. He just stopped moving, crouched at the stage lip, and looked at this 14-year-old from Nebraska who was sitting perfectly still while the world moved and roared around him. The boy looked back. There was no reaching, no screaming of his name, no attempt to close the gap the way most people tried to close it. He just looked at Elvis with those steady, serious eyes, the way you might look at something you had been carrying in your imagination for a long time and were now surprised to find looked exactly as you had pictured. Elvis said nothing into the microphone. He glanced briefly at Charlie, who was at the edge of his sight line at stage left. A small gesture, barely perceptible, a tilt of the head, an opening of the hand. Charlie, who had read these signals for 15 years, understood. He leaned down. The boy's father started to rise slightly in his seat, uncertain whether this was something he should be prepared for. Elvis put one hand up gently, not a stop, just a patience, and looked at the boy directly. "What's your name?" The boy's composure held for exactly 1 second. Then something in it softened. "Danny." Elvis nodded once. "You want to come up here, Danny?" The room heard it. The crowd noise shifted, not quieter but differently textured, the sound of collective attention focusing on a single point. People at the back tables stood on their chairs. The women in the second row turned. A ripple of awareness moved through the room the way awareness moves through a crowd when something unscripted is happening. The boy looked at his father. His father, this broad man in his sport coat, who had written a letter months ago and driven from Nebraska and sat here in this showroom, nodded once. Just once. A security man appeared from the side and helped the boy up. And then Danny was standing on the stage, in the lights, in front of 2,000 people, next to Elvis Presley. He was small up there, small the way people always are when the context suddenly shifts, when the place they're standing in becomes larger than they'd calculated. He stood very still, his hands at his sides, his pressed shirt slightly bright under the stage lights, and he looked out at the room and then back at Elvis. Elvis put a hand on his shoulder, a light hand, just enough to anchor. "You from around here?" "Nebraska," the boy said. His voice was quiet, but the microphone was close. "Nebraska." Elvis repeated the word with the particular warmth he had for places outside the glamour circuit, for the ordinary geography of the country he had come from, and still felt was more real than this room. Long drive, 14 hours, something in the room shifted again. Not silence exactly. The crowd was still present, still breathing, but a quality of listening that was different from the performative listening of a concert, the kind of listening that happens when people recognize that something true is occurring. Elvis looked at the boy for a moment, just looked at him. He had a way of doing this, of holding a moment without filling it, that his musicians knew well. It made some people nervous. It made others feel, strangely, seen. "You like music?" Elvis asked. "Yes, sir." "You play anything?" A pause. Then, "I'm learning guitar." Elvis turned slightly toward James Burton, who was watching from his position at stage right with an expression of quiet attention. Burton smiled, barely, the smile of someone who understood what was happening and was glad to be present for it. "Guitar's a good thing to learn," Elvis said. He wasn't performing now. The voice was still amplified, still reaching the back of the room. But it had lost the concert register. It was just a voice. Takes time. Don't let anybody tell you you're not getting better fast enough. You take the time it takes. The boy nodded. His composure was back, steadier now than it had been when he'd first climbed up. He seemed to have found something to stand on. What happened next was unrehearsed, which meant it was also ungainly, imperfect, real. Elvis turned to Ronnie Tutt and to the keyboard and said something they couldn't quite hear from the front row, and there was a brief conference of musicians, that rapid, silent language of people who have played together long enough to negotiate whole conversations with a look. Then Burton began to play. It was "Love Me Tender," just the opening chords, very soft, barely above the ambient sound of the room. The bass came in underneath, gentle. No drums yet. Elvis took the microphone in his right hand and turned to face the boy squarely. He was perhaps 3 feet away from him. He didn't ask Danny to do anything. He didn't explain to the audience what was happening. He just began to sing, looking at the boy from Nebraska who was learning guitar and having a difficult year in the way that 14-year-olds sometimes have difficult years, and who had asked his father for exactly one thing. His voice in those early bars of "Love Me Tender" was not the full concert voice. It was the voice beneath that, more human, slightly rougher at the edges, carrying the weight of 2,000 shows and every mile that had led to this one. It was the voice he used when he wasn't trying to be anything in particular. The room was quiet in a way it almost never was. 2,000 people had somehow arrived at the collective understanding that speaking or screaming right now would cost them something they didn't want to lose. Danny stood in the light and listened. His face had changed. The composure was still there, but something underneath it had loosened, the way a held breath loosens when you finally let it go. His eyes were bright, not with tears, not yet, just bright in the way eyes get when something reaches through the ordinary distance between a person and the world and lands. Elvis sang the first verse through, and then the chorus, and then his voice did something at the bridge that the musicians heard and the audience heard and even the boy heard. A slight catch, a momentary departure from the smooth line of the melody, where something personal slipped through the performance. It was brief, it passed quickly, but it was there, and everyone in the room felt it, even if they couldn't have named it. At the end of the song, the room held its silence for 1 breath, 2 breaths, and then the applause came. Enormous, not the screaming frenzy of the concert, but something fuller and more sustained. The applause of people who have witnessed something and want to mark it. Elvis lowered the microphone. He looked at the boy. He didn't say anything that the microphone could pick up. Whatever he said quietly, leaned slightly toward the boy, and only Danny heard it. The boy's expression in response was not readable from the audience. It was private. Then Elvis straightened up and looked out at the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "Danny from Nebraska." The applause came back, warmer now. The security man helped Danny down from the stage, and the boy returned to his father's table, and his father put an arm around him, and neither of them said anything. In the photographs that several people took that night, amateur photographs, slightly blurred, the way all photographs from that era were when taken in low light, you can see the boy sitting back at the table with his father's arm around him. His face is not visible in most of the images, but in one of them, taken from the right angle, you can see his profile, and on it is the expression of someone who has just received something they didn't know they needed until the moment it arrived. Elvis went back to the show. He sang Suspicious Minds and Burning Love and Promised Land, and the crowd gave him everything they had. The energy in the room was different now. Not higher exactly, but changed, as if the temperature of the air had shifted. The performance that followed had a quality that the musicians noticed and would mention to each other afterward. Elvis was present in a way he hadn't quite been at the start of the night. Not effortful, not performing being present. Just there, in the room, in the music, in the 47 steps from the dressing room, where a tired man became the person the world was waiting for. He ended the show the way he always ended it. Can't help falling in love. The orchestra swelling beneath him. The lights beginning their slow fade to blue, and then he was gone. Back through the wings, back down the corridor, back into the quiet he needed, and never quite found. Backstage, Charlie was waiting with a towel. He always waited with a towel. Elvis sat down on a folding chair. He pressed the towel against his face, and when he lowered it, he looked at Charlie with an expression that Charlie would later describe carefully and only to a few people as the expression of someone who has remembered something important after a long time of not being able to quite place it. "Nebraska," Elvis said. 14 hours, Charlie said. Elvis nodded slowly. He sat with that for a moment. The headache was still there, the throbbing behind his left eye that had been there for 3 days. His joints still ached in the dull, persistent way that had become familiar. None of that had changed, but something had. He asked for the rest of the night's schedule. He ate something, more than he had been eating. He read for an hour before sleeping, and when he slept, it was with more stillness than it had been. In the days that followed, the musicians noticed that he seemed more engaged with the shows, not in a dramatic way, not as if some great transformation had occurred, but in small ways. He adjusted a lyric during "In the Ghetto" and kept the adjustment the next night, which meant it was deliberate. He stopped the band mid-rehearsal to work through a vocal passage more carefully, asking them to give him more space, to pull back slightly so the breath beneath the words could be heard. These were the moves of someone who was paying attention. The boy and his father drove home to Nebraska. Danny was quiet in the car for the first few hours, the way people are quiet when they are thinking about something they don't have words for yet. His father didn't push. He was the kind of man who understood that some things needed to be driven home without being spoken. Near the Colorado border, Danny said, "He told me something." His father kept his eyes on the road. "Yeah?" he said. The boy stopped. He looked out the window at the flat, dark landscape moving past. He said, "Keep playing." He said the hard parts don't mean stop. His father drove. The headlights made a moving corridor of light in the Nebraska dark. "Good advice," his father said. He said it like he meant it, Danny said. Like he wasn't saying it for me. Like he was just saying it. His father thought about that. He thought about what it looked like from the front table, the way Elvis had looked at his son and sung to him, and then leaned in and said whatever he had said, quietly, just between them. He had driven 14 hours for his son, had written a letter and gotten a response, and dressed Danny in a pressed shirt and sat in the front row of the Las Vegas Hilton, and he had not known what to expect, had not hoped for anything specific. He had hoped only that it would help, in the particular way that fathers sometimes hope for things they can't name, that the world will give their children something the world is not always in the habit of giving. It had. Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977, 13 months after his final Las Vegas engagement, and 3 years after the night a boy from Nebraska climbed onto a stage. He was 42 years old. The manner of his death has been written about extensively in the years since. The health, the medication, the decline that his closest associates watched with grief and helplessness. He was, in the last years of his life, a man under enormous pressure with too few resources to meet it, and the gap between those two things eventually became impossible to close. But there were nights. There were specific, particular nights in the middle of all of it, when something reached through. People who attended the Las Vegas shows in those years sometimes talk about moments like the one with Danny. Moments when the performance paused, when something unscripted happened, when Elvis seemed to locate himself in the room and in the music and in the person in front of him in a way that cut through everything else. These moments were not consistent. They were not manufactured. They occurred in the spaces between the machinery of touring and performing, when something genuinely human passed between the stage and the seats. Danny grew up. He kept playing guitar, the way he had been told to. The hard parts didn't mean stop, and he didn't stop. He learned the instrument slowly, the way all real learning happens, haltingly, with periods of stagnation, followed by sudden small advances that felt larger than they were because they had taken so long to arrive. He played in a band in high school. He played in bars after that, small places that were not famous and did not need to be. He played at his own wedding, for his own children's birthdays, for the kind of occasions that don't make the record books but that are the actual substance of a life. He kept the memory of the stage, the heat of the lights, the 2,000 people, visible and invisible in the dark, the hand on his shoulder, the voice close and quiet saying the thing it said, the way you keep certain memories, not locked away, just held, somewhere reliable, taken out sometimes when things were difficult, when the hard parts arrived and needed to be remembered as not meaning stop. In 1977, when the news came on the radio, Danny was 17 and working a summer job, and he sat down in the middle of what he had been doing. He sat there for a while. There was nothing useful to do with what he was feeling, so he just sat. Later, his father found him. He didn't say much. He was still that kind of man, but he sat down beside his son, and they stayed there together for a while, in the particular quiet of people who have been somewhere together that they can't entirely explain. Years later, Danny would try to tell the story to people who hadn't been there. He would try to explain what it had meant. A 14-year-old boy in a pressed shirt, sitting at a front table in Las Vegas, climbed onto a stage in front of 2,000 people and stood in the lights next to a man who sang to him and said something quiet that only he could hear. The difficulty was that the story sounded like something else when told. It sounded like a story about a famous person being kind to a child, which was true as far as it went, but missed the thing that mattered. What mattered was not the kindness exactly. What mattered was the quality of the attention, the way Elvis had looked at him, not at the crowd or the cameras or the abstraction of a fan, but at him specifically, at a 14-year-old having a difficult year who had driven 14 hours to be close to something he believed in. What mattered was being seen, not by a legend, not by a celebrity, by a tired man in a white jumpsuit who had 47 steps to walk and a headache that wouldn't stop and 2,000 nights behind him, and who, on this particular Tuesday in August, paused in front of one still, serious face and decided that whatever came next could wait. The decision took maybe 15 seconds. It changed nothing and everything, the way all real moments do. Some people come into a room and take the air out of it, needing all of it for themselves. And some people, the rare ones, come into a room and make the air available, push it toward whoever needs it most, without instruction, without announcement, without needing to be remembered for it. Elvis Presley, was many things that were complicated and not always good. He was exhausted and unwell and surrounded by people who loved him but couldn't always reach him. He made decisions that hurt him and sometimes hurt others. He was human in all the ways that humans are human, which is to say, imperfectly, inconsistently, and sometimes more beautifully than anyone had a right to expect. But on a Tuesday in August, in a room in Las Vegas, he saw a boy from Nebraska sitting very still in all the noise, and he reached out his hand, and he said, "Come up." And the boy came up, and that was enough. That was always, somehow, enough.